on tonight's edition of NewsCenter. South Korea warns the North it will pay a harsh price if the reclusive state does indeed go ahead with a plan to launch a satellite into space. China calls for all sides to show restraint over North Korea's planned rocket launch, while Japan says it will shoot down North Korean rocket if it threatens its territory. And Korea is putting aside an additional $17.4 billion for its fiscal spending in the first quarter of this year to prime the economy. It's Wednesday, February 3rd, 2016. Good evening to our viewers in Korea. Hello to those around the world. This is NewsCenter. Searing consequences is what South Korea has warned North Korea of if the North does not abandon plans to launch a long-range rocket that critics call a banned test of ballistic missile technology. Now, Seoul's rhetoric about unspecified harsh consequences following a National Security Council meeting earlier this morning. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun reports.
North Korea has notified the UN bodies responsible for maritime affairs and telecommunications that it will launch a satellite called Hwangmyeong-song sometime between February 8th and the 25th. Pyongyang claims the satellite is for Earth observation, but Seoul and Washington say it is almost certainly a cover-up for ballistic missile test. Very little is known about the technical capability of North Korean satellites or if they're even functional. Of greater concern is that any satellite sits atop a long-range, multi-stage rocket that is the equivalent of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Such a missile, if perfected, could be fitted with a nuclear warhead and used to strike the United States. Following a National Security Council meeting Wednesday morning, South Korea warned the North to cancel its missile launch, saying it would be a clear breach of international resolutions and would further destabilize the region after the regime's recent nuclear test.
At a time when new sanctions are being discussed following North Korea's fourth nuclear test, the regime's latest announcement is a direct challenge to the international community. Pyongyang must realize that any launch using ballistic missile technology is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea must immediately scrap its launch plan.
South Korean officials say if North Korea pushes ahead regardless, the launch will pose a serious threat to peace on the Korean peninsula, in Northeast Asia and the world. Pyongyang's launch announcement comes less than 1 month after it conducted its fourth nuclear test, which it claimed was a hydrogen bomb, on January 6. In cooperation with the international community, South Korea, the US, and Japan are seeking the strongest sanctions yet on North Korea for last month's provocation. South Korea says it will remain at full military readiness against any North Korean provocation, including the rocket launch that threatens the safety and security of its people. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea's decision to launch a long-range rocket is raising alarm and drawing condemnation from neighboring countries. Our Kwon So-ah joins us from Seoul's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, So-ah, the U.S., Japan, and now even China has joined the global chorus of anger and concern over North Korea.
That's right, Kanyang. It's no wonder that the condemnation coming from these countries, the stakeholders, is growing as the latest provocation comes just a month after Pyongyang's fourth nuclear test. And one of the strongest objections are coming from Japan, as it's saying that it's willing to shoot the North Korean rocket down if it comes near its territory. Japanese Defense Minister Gen Nakatani gave the order Wednesday as the possibility of the North testing a missile has grown. Earlier Wednesday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called the plan a serious provocation, saying it would be a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions banning North Korea from ballistic missile technology.
In addition to working closely with other connected parties, we will strongly demand North Korea show self-control to prevent such events.
The U.S. reaction was similar.
I feel confident in telling you that the international community would regard a step like that by the North Koreans as just another irresponsible provocation and a clear violation of their international obligations.
The White House spokesman added the U.S. is encouraging cooperation from China as it is in a, quote, unique position as the North's sole ally. That's also why the international community's attention is fixed on Beijing, as its top nuclear envoy Woo Da-wei is currently in Pyongyang. He is expected to bring up the North's nuclear test last month, the reason for the UN Security Council's current push toward tougher sanctions on the regime. On Wednesday, Beijing expressed its, quote, serious concern about the satellite launch plan and called on Pyongyang to exercise restraint. Meanwhile, Seoul's foreign ministry said Wednesday that the ministry is closely cooperating with China, the UN Security Council, and others. And Minister Yoon Byung-se had an online video conference call with UN members Tuesday night, followed by a discussion at the ministry on a response scenario in the event of a launch. Konyang?
All right, our Kwon So-ah live from Seoul's Foreign Affairs Ministry. Thanks, So-ah. Now, the big question now is exactly when will North Korea fire off its so-called Earth observation satellite on a rocket into space? What Pyongyang has notified both the International Maritime Organization and the International Telecommunication Union is a 17-day window starting February 8th. Our Connie Kim spoke with some North Korea experts to try and narrow that down to a single date.
North Korea's last 3 long-range rocket launches have followed the same pattern. First, Pyongyang notified the International Maritime Organization, a UN body responsible for maritime safety, of a plan to launch an Earth observation satellite, and then it fired. This time is no exception. Given that, the focus among North Korea experts is not on if a launch will happen, but when. Some analysts say it'll take place around a widely celebrated national holiday.
The launch could be a celebratory message around Kim Jong-il's birthday, which falls on February 16th. There is a high possibility of a launch sometime between the Lunar New Year holiday and then.
Others say it won't happen until after the adoption of a new UN Security Council resolution currently in development. In the past, North Korea has carried out new provocations after it's been slapped with a new set of international sanctions. What's also important to note at this point, analysts say, is that China's nuclear envoy is currently in North Korea. Woo Da-wei traveled to Pyongyang on Tuesday to meet with senior North Korean officials, widely seen as a move to address the tensions triggered by North Korea's nuclear test.
If North Korea wants to use the launch to gain leverage in negotiations, it could drag out the timeline. If this is the case, the launch might not come until sometime near the 25th, the last day in the North's announcement.
With no certain date set for the launch, the only sure thing is that North Korea will increase its isolation from the international community if it goes ahead with the plan. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Korea ranks 121st out of 140 countries in labor market flexibility, and the youth unemployment rate stands at a 16-year high. This is why President Park's labor market reform drive will serve the best interests of the nation's workers, reads a Wall Street Journal editorial. For more, here's Park Ji-won.
In an editorial on Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal praised the Korean government's efforts to push ahead with labor reforms. The paper characterized Korea's new labor guidelines as progress. The new rules seek to revise employment-related regulations and give companies more freedom to fire employees with poor performance records. The paper said given that Korea ranks 121st out of 140 countries in labor market flexibility and the youth unemployment rate stands at a 16-year high this year, the Park Geun-hye administration's initiatives to ease Korea's rigid labor market serve workers' best interests. The paper said more flexible labor policies would increase productivity and lift wages as well as boost the global competitiveness of Korean goods. While a set of labor reform bills still pending in Parliament, Korea's Labor Ministry implemented 2 labor-related guidelines late last month that allow for the early adoption of a wage pick system and greater flexibility in the labor market. Although the guidelines are not legally binding, they could be used by government officials when supervising labor management relations. The nation's 2 major labor unions strongly oppose the guidelines. They recently held a press conference calling on the National Human Rights Commission to start an investigation into the legitimacy of the guidelines. The unions also said the proposal is an abuse of administrative power that violates the Constitution. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in Parliament, Korean lawmakers will have another chance to vote on the so-called One-Shot Act tomorrow after missing their chance last week. The bill is part of a package of long-stalled economic bills promoted by the president and the ruling party. Our senior parliamentary correspondent Kim Young-gil has this report.
If all goes to plan, the so-called One-Shot Act could finally come up for a vote on Thursday after weeks of bipartisan wrangling. The bill almost came up for a vote last week before a fresh debate pushed it off again. Now it will be brought to the floor by National Assembly Speaker Chung Lee-hwa, who had previously been reluctant to use his position to introduce bills without bipartisan agreement. The sudden turnaround is thought to be the result of pressure from the ruling Saenuri Party and presidential office to move forward with the bill, which would relax regulations and provide tax cuts for companies that want to sell an affiliate or buy another company. The main opposition Minju Party objects to Chung's move. It wants to bundle the One-Shot Act with a bill on redrawing Korea's electoral map, which it says is more urgent since the next parliamentary election is just over 2 months away.
We are against the Speaker's decision to hold a plenary session on February 4th. The ruling party should stop acting unilaterally and cooperate with us to introduce the bill to redraw Korea's electoral map with the other key bills.
The ruling Saenuri Party says its actions are justified since it cannot trust the opposition. It fears that if it agreed to vote on the electoral map first before the economy-related bills, the opposition would refuse to hold up its end of the bargain.
Passage of the economy-related bills will create new opportunities in this time of crisis. The rival parties cannot be split on improving people's livelihoods. Now is the time to act. It shouldn't be redistricting first, but livelihoods first. We ask for the opposition party's cooperation.
Korea's electoral map expired at the end of last year. The National Election Commission says if Parliament does not find a solution by February 23rd, it will not only affect local campaigning, but overseas Koreans will not be able to vote because the Commission will not be able to assign them to voting districts. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
To prime the ailing economy, the Korean government has rolled out a fresh stimulus to prop up the economy hit by sluggish exports and weak domestic demand. Hwang Ji-hae breaks down how much will be injected and where.
Korea will front-load roughly $5 billion more of its budget in the first quarter of this year. The government expects the extra injection to boost the country's growth rate by 0.2 percentage points over the corresponding period. The amount of state funds set aside to support local companies will also be raised.
We plan to pour in an additional $12.5 billion in policy financing in the first quarter, focusing especially on helping local exporters.
And that will put the total amount of increased fiscal spending to shore up the economy during the first quarter at more than $17 billion. The measures laid out during an economy-related ministers' meeting on Wednesday come as exports continue to lose steam. The country's traditional growth engine dropped by its biggest margin in over 6 years last month, posting its 13th straight month of decline. To boost spending, the government will also extend a tax cut for automobile purchases to June, originally set to expire last year. Some experts are concerned that spending could flatline early this year as domestic consumption late last year was driven up by temporary government-led sales events. And another package of stimulus measures is set to be introduced later this month with a focus on boosting investment and removing excessive regulations to spur job creation in new markets. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Plunging oil prices have dealt a heavy blow to a number of countries that depend on exports for growth, like Korea. Asia's fourth largest economy saw its outbound shipments plunge last month after 13 straight months of decline, and the Korean government has vowed to launch new initiatives to counter that trend. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The Trade Ministry says it will expand the number of times it sends trade delegations around the world, from 73 to 109 in the first half of the year. In particular, the ministry says it is hoping to engage new trading partners, such as Cuba, and strengthen existing relationships, such as with Iran, by helping Korean exporters build new distribution chains in the target countries. The ministry says it will also work on boosting exports to China, Korea's biggest trading partner, by helping local exporters advance into China's consumer market. In order to do that, the ministry plans to increase research and development of Korean cosmetics and medical products while boosting shipments of agricultural and marine products. It will also establish an $82.4 million development fund to promote Korean cultural content and build a cultural content center in Beijing. To maximize its free trade agreement with China, the Trade Ministry says it will launch a series of trade events throughout the year. The ministry plans to give Korean products that are sold online a mark to certify the quality of the products for foreign consumers. Trade Minister Chu Young-hwan said the country's export decline is due to falling global oil prices and the slowdown in global economic growth. Korea's exports in January dropped 18.5% from the previous month, the biggest plunge in nearly 6.5 years. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, the Korean won dropped against the U.S. dollar to close the day at a 5.5-year low as oil prices extended losses and sparked a rush out of risk assets. But the Korean currency is not alone in losing ground against the greenback. Here's our Ipchun with the details.
Amid the continuous slump in global oil prices and stock markets, the Korean won-dollar exchange rate hit the lowest since July of 2010. The local currency closed at 1219.31 against the greenback, down almost 12 won from Tuesday's close. This comes on the heels of renewed fears that the oil glut will continue as hopes for a deal between OPEC nations and Russia to cut production dimmed, and the benchmark West Texas Intermediate lost over 5%. Concerns over additional rate cut in Japan have also aggravated the situation, as Japan's top central banker indicated that rates could be cut further if necessary. Last week, Japan's central bank decided to adopt a negative interest rate policy, introducing an interest rate of minus 0.1% starting mid-February. Asian markets were also affected by such global concerns. Japan's Nikkei fell over 3%, and the Shanghai Composite Index also declined nearly 0.4%. On the local bourse, Korea's benchmark Kospi edged down over 0.8%. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the UN Climate Conference in December last year produced an unprecedented agreement across the global community. Countries pledged to combat climate change and aim at a low-carbon, resilient, and sustainable future. Well, with this in mind, the Korean government is also stepping up efforts to reduce emissions from vehicles by promoting these eco-friendly hybrid cars, which actually saw a historic jump in sales last year. More and more hybrid cars in the streets. Our news feature tonight with Oh Soo-young.
Last year, hybrid car sales hit a milestone record in the Korean auto market, jumping 7% from the year before. This took industry watchers by surprise, as the record was set amid the falling global oil prices, which would usually make conventional gasoline models a more attractive option. In fact, the last 3 years have seen a steady growth for sales of hybrid models. And experts believe the upward trend is an indication that Korean consumers are becoming more environmentally conscious.
Full hybrid models are 30 to 40% more fuel efficient than conventional gasoline models, which means they emit that much less in pollutants. And with more than 20 years in technological development, their price competitiveness, endurance, and credibility in the market have all stabilized.
With hybrid models at the helm, sales of eco-friendly vehicles have grown at an average annual rate of 20% for the past 5 years, 6 times higher than that of conventional cars.
Among the various kinds of green cars, hybrids, plug-ins, hydrogen, and electric vehicles, hybrids are currently the only realistic option as they don't require extra infrastructure like charging stations.
Hybrid vehicles combine a conventional gas engine with an electric motor and battery, reducing fuel consumption while emitting fewer pollutants. For years, hybrid car makers mainly strove to better fuel efficiency, but now the goal is to improve driving performance and diversify lineups. Korea's top automaker Hyundai Motor has released hybrid variants of its existing models, and last month introduced the Ioniq, its first exclusively hybrid model, which industry experts see as the equivalent to the Toyota Prius, the current market leader. With these developments, hybrid car sales in Korea are expected to surpass the 50,000 unit mark this year alone. The hype over hybrid cars in Korea coincides with global efforts to tackle global warming, including the pledges made at the Paris Climate Conference in December last year. The Korean government is aiming to cut auto emissions to 97 grams per kilometre by the year 2020, down from the current 140 grams, mainly by expanding green car ownership through various incentives.
We aim to increase green car ownership by more than 1 million vehicles and bump up market share to 20% in the next 5 years.
Owners of hybrid cars in Korea currently receive subsidies of up to $824 and tax deductions of around $2,200. But experts say these benefits won't be enough to lift the country's green car market to the level of its global counterparts. Despite the jump in hybrid car ownership, Korea's green car sales came to less than 2% of all auto sales last year, while countries like the United States and Japan have seen more than 25%, thanks to stronger subsidies for green car owners and stricter regulations on heavily polluting vehicles.
The biggest problem is that there's no single authority over automobile technology development. In Korea, there are 3 different government ministries related to cars, each with different roles. There's a need for a control tower that brings these efforts together, raising awareness, research and incentive programs, and enhancing Korea's strengths in the industry.
To further nurture the expanding market of green vehicles, experts say the government must take a carrot and stick approach to induce both car makers and consumers to pursue a more sustainable means of driving. 오수영, Arirang News.
The Zika virus continues to spread, with the World Health Organization estimating it could infect 4 million people in the Americas this year alone. Now, health officials initially said the spread was limited to mosquito bites, but a case confirmed in the U.S. suggests otherwise. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Bruce, it now appears the virus can be spread through sexual intercourse.
That's right, Kanyang. This is the first known case of Zika virus transmission in the U.S. That's transmission, not presence. And federal health officials are saying that it was likely through sex. And where it occurred in the U.S. is important. In the U.S. state of Texas, local health officials said there were no reports of virus transmission by mosquitoes in that area.
Right, Bruce, the virus has been linked to severe birth defects, especially in thousands of babies in Brazil, and it's led the WHO to call it a global health emergency. Now, how sure are the researchers about this new means of transmission or person-to-person transmission?
Sure, well, there's still research being done, and they haven't come out and said with 100% certainty that this is, in fact, how that disease was transmitted. It was transmitted by sex this time. They're not 100% sure, but doctors at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S. do seem confident that that is the case. The center's laboratory confirmed 2 people, a couple, both have the infection now, but only one of them recently traveled outside of the country.
With Zika, we don't know exactly how long someone can remain infectious. But in this case, as we understand it, someone had just gotten sick with Zika, and that individual's sexual partner then developed Zika without a travel history.
The Texas Department of State Health Services says the case is still being evaluated, but sexual transmission is likely the cause of infection. According to the WHO, the virus causes a mild fever and skin rash that could last around a week in most people. But in pregnant women, the virus has been linked to microcephaly, a condition that causes underdeveloped brains in babies. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has reignited his fight to amend Japan's pacifist constitution. According to the Japan Times, Abe told lawmakers Wednesday because the constitution was created while the U.S. occupied Japan after World War II, some parts of it don't fit with current times. He argues the existence of Japan's self-defense forces and a constitutional ban on Japan maintaining armed forces are contradictory. Last fall, the Times reported much of Japan, including Abe's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, had lost interest in trying to change the constitution. Abe wants to implement a draft written by his ruling party, which would broaden the operational scope of the country's self-defense forces.
Now, Bruce, leading Chinese airlines have announced they'll work together to blacklist rowdy passengers. Now, what are we talking about?
Sure. Well, apparently, along with China's growing demand for airline usage has come longer waits, maybe a natural expectation. But a lot of people have been losing their cool because of those waits. Some of the disruptions include a man setting fire to a plane curtain in a first-class cabin and a group of Chinese tourists singing the Chinese national anthem and refusing to board a plane in Bangkok after a long delay.
It's not realistic to make so many people behave properly all of a sudden, because people from different places have different levels of civilization. So some people may not be very civilized.
Some passengers, though, say they'd rather avoid the potential for delay and support the airline's move.
Right, and it's for the sake of safety of the passengers as well. I mean, setting a curtain on fire in the first-class cabin, that's just unimaginable. Now, Bruce, it's really unclear when the airline will begin implementing this blacklist, but, there is a big holiday coming up. Billions will be on the move.
It's an incredible amount of people that are moving for the Lunar New Year holiday. And like you said, it's unclear when they're going to start using this blacklist, but I could imagine with all the traffic and maybe some tired travelers, now may be a time when that list expands a bit over the holiday season.
Right. Well, behave if you want to travel, especially on air. So
yeah, sing in the shower.
Right. All right. Thank you, Bruce, for that, and we will see you tomorrow.
My pleasure.
Well, good news here. Seems like the cold snap has finally subsided. For more, let's go live to our Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Ji-hyun, things surely have warmed up this afternoon. I'm so glad.
Hello, Gonyoung. Yes, I'm glad too. Cold wave alerts have been lifted in most parts of the country, but we should continue to drink that water as a dry weather advisory is still in place here in the capital.
Right, and Jian, as you said, Ipchun, which is the beginning of spring, that's tomorrow already.
It is already, right? Ipchun, which marks the first day of this spring season, falls on tomorrow, and living up to its name, it's going to be a mild Ipchun day tomorrow with daily lows starting out at -4 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, which is slightly above the seasonal average. And mostly sunny skies are expected across the nation, including here in Seoul. So on that note, let's move on to tomorrow's temperature readings, checking on the lows first. So while here in the capital starts out at -4 degrees Celsius, Daegu will kick off at -3, and Busan and Jeju will have a positive morning low, kicking off at 1 and 3 tomorrow morning. And much milder daily highs are expected, with a high peaking to 4 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, 7 for Daejeon and Gwangju, 6 for Daegu, and Busan and Jeju will see a high of 8 tomorrow afternoon. Now, the Lunar New Year's holiday starts this weekend with a drop in temperature in store for a Saturday, but weather-wise, it's going to be a pretty mild Lunar New Year's holiday. Even Wednesday, the daily high here is Seoul will peaking to 10 degrees Celsius, but we do have rain in the forecast on Monday for upper parts of the country, including here in Seoul. Now that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, those flowers, they make me feel like it's spring already, but I wouldn't put away my snow boots and my gloves just yet. That is our broadcast on this Wednesday night. I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.